Hey everyone, welcome back to Indie Weekly. This week is a bit of a different format. I decided not to do a top 10 as I had a small vacation with my family. It turns out I kind of like this 5 to 10 format, so just as a heads up, I may continue it in the future. Today though, I have 6 indies you may have missed. Before I get started, don't forget to check out the Victorium giveaway if you haven't. It's an awesome twin stick shooter with some tricks up its sleeve, and you have a couple more days to score a free copy. The video for that will be linked in the description. And of course, like this video, and if you're new, subscribe to the channel. With that, here are the 6 indies you may have missed between May 5th and May 11th. Number 6. RPGolf. Even just seeing the name RPGolf might cause your spam spidey sense to tingle, but fear not. While this does appear to be influenced by the Camelot Mario Golf entries, it's different enough from that and Golf Story to be evaluated independently. The premise is simple but charming. A golf getaway island has been overrun by monsters. Unfortunately, it's an island full of pacifists, and so the villagers abandon golf altogether. That's where our visor-wearing heroine steps in. Apparently, she's been training with a sensei to prepare her for the golf course. Before you set out, you can inspect a book that reveals a curious bit of information. Your RPG stats affect your golfing and your combat skills. The expected example is that strength will allow you to hit further in golf and harder in combat. Perhaps a bit more surprising though, intelligence will allow a greater amount of spin in addition to the increase in magic-based damage output. As you level up, you can choose to assign points to these 4 stats: strength, intelligence, defense, and PRC. By themselves, both halves of the game play out very ordinarily. In the golf half, you can switch between clubs, set an angle and a spin, and use the power meter to place your shot. The combat half feels very much like an SNES action RPG. It happens in real time and involves meleeing in close quarters, or if you have mana and the appropriate gear, you can use your magic. While these mechanics are very straightforward, I thought the novelty came from the way they influenced each other. If you don't get a hole-in-one, you'll need to engage the monsters on the course to get to your ball and attempt the next shot. In turn, these fights will give you experience points that you can use in golf. Furthermore, there are dungeons that provide some more flavor by adding boss fights. These might reward you with items that will open up more of the map a la The Legend of Zelda. Together, the two halves make for an enjoyable, if not particularly deep, experience. It's also a bit rough on polish, there's no controller remapping, and it could stand to use some quality of life improvements like not having to go to the inventory to use a potion. The main campaign is composed of 9 holes that appear to take about 3 hours to complete. However, I understand there's also a back half composed of more difficult versions of the original 9 holes. For me, this feels like the sort of game you might fire up as a palate cleanser in between larger adventures. Number 5. Odium to the Core. Best with headphones reads the suggestion at the top of the game, Odium to the Core. But I somehow missed that when I first fired it up. This resulted in a pleasant surprise, the realization that this game was no ordinary single-button flight game. More jetpack joyride than Flappy Bird when it comes to controls. You hold the button to accelerate upwards and let go for gravity to take its course. You collect orbs along the way and are scored based on your collection skills and by how little you tap. The more often you tap, the lower your score. By aiming to collect the bits while maintaining my current state of acceleration or deceleration for as long as I could, I realized I was getting closer and closer to tapping to the beat of the soundtrack. Ha! This is a rhythm game, I realized. This epiphany adds a texture to an otherwise simple genre. In fact, the developers did a great job of spicing it up overall. There are lots of switches and hidden paths and a variety of obstacles that oscillate between intimidating and dangerous. This makes Odium a pleasure to rock with. Number 4. Unleash. Unleash released into early access, and it's clear that this game is a work in progress, but what's already there is truly promising, certainly even worth the current price of entry. To be fair, the world of multiplayer tower defense is novel to me. However, this is a genre which designers have begun to experiment with and even borne fruit of. Through my research, I learned of Orcs Must Die Unchained, which takes the active tower defense play that the series is so good at and meshes it with MOBA traits to create an interesting multiplayer experience. Even a 6-year-old game in the way of Tower Wars presents itself as an RTS meets TD genre for 1v1 or team-based battles. Unleash seems to draw inspiration from the latter, naming its standout mode Line Towers mode. While you can play a standard tower defense campaign, that's really just an amuse-bouche for the head-to-head multiplayer. In the Tower Wars mode, there can be up to 8 players, but you'll only have to concern yourself with 2 at a time. The playfield is set up with 1 vertically stretching lane per player for that individual to defend. Their assailant is the nearest active player to the left. Meanwhile, they'll have to multitask by targeting their nearest active player to the right. As an assailant, you're spawning monsters in the defender's lane. As a defender, you're setting up structures and weapons to keep the monsters at bay. All the while, both are accruing credits to spend on units, but also on research and upgrades that will expand your offensive and defensive arsenals. The units that you can summon might have weaknesses and strengths, so it behooves you to keep in mind what your opponents are capable of. If you force your target to set up a defensive artillery against monsters that are weak to electricity, now might be a good time to send in creatures that are resistant. Similarly, you'll have to consider what manner of minions your assailant will be sending your way. Curiously, you can also specify a preferred loadout of monsters. You choose 10 out of a 19 possible to take with you into battle. In addition to what's there's an ambitious roadmap for the early access phase. Between now and release, the developers intend to add 3 new areas, updated graphics, a few more game modes, editors for maps and scenarios, as well as roll out champions and spells and bolster the roster of monsters and towers. Being the first release for this team onto Steam, it's difficult to tell how realistic this roadmap is, so if you're looking for a more established product, it's best to wait. That said, what's there is very compelling for the $10, and even if you can't find friends to play against, the bots provided have been an engaging challenge. Number 3. Shrug Island: The Meeting. Friends once together, now apart, you are two halves of a key. When one cannot move, seek help from the other, and find a doorway to me. This sweet stanza is how Shrug Island opens, and it sets the tone perfectly. Accompanying the text during this intro are cave art-like drawings, and these too are indicative of the adventure ahead. Shrug Island is a beautiful point-and-click adventure whose narrative plays out rather abstractly. Even in speaking to NPCs, the words exchanged are usually minimal and more often hint towards their meaning rather than outright tell you. Shrug Island asks you to switch between two characters with complementary powers in order to help each other progress. You start by controlling Lee. True to the art house-like personality I've described thus far, she does an interpretive dance to activate her power, the ability to scan for hidden on-screen items. These items will usually provide her partner some way to move forward. Her partner and the second playable character, Shri, can, quote, create motion with notes. When Shri finds a light plant, you can prompt a transformation that allows Shri to play abstract musical notes from her inventory. Each note will yield a transformation of its own, but this time in the world space as opposed to your avatar. These can open up new paths for Lee. The game continues to ping-pong in this manner for its duration, which appears to be about 90 minutes for the first playthrough. The press for Shrug Island paints it as a game about reconnecting, but the way Shri and Lee assist one another with minimal communication make it feel like a lesson in how we are still connected even when distant. The way shared experiences can result in a shared dialect no matter how far removed. For this novel interweaving of narrative and mechanics, Shrug Island is a beautiful, if short, adventure that's well worth your time. Number 2. Subaeria. Subaeria is a roguelite action puzzler set in the dystopian aftermath of a climate disaster. The world has been flooded and the survivors now live in the titular underwater city, Subaeria. It's not a dystopia without severe inequality, so the poor face harsh punishments for minimal infractions. In the short introduction, the protagonist Styx attempts to steal some credits, resulting in her and her family being greenlit for cleansing. Despite the common sci-fi tropes, this all sets up for a rich setting in an isometric playfield. You play as Styx and can control her drone with the right analog stick. You'll come across randomly placed skills that you can install onto the drone. For instance, Master allows you to possess one of the cleaners, the robot's tasked with cleansing petty criminals. You can then walk it into a laser, thus obliterating itself. Your drone can have 2 skills equipped at once, and they each have limited use, so you'll have to learn to leverage different combinations to survive your playthrough. Other skills include the ability to dash through danger, set up a decoy, or target one cleaner which will cause other cleaners to become hostile towards it. The result is a series of interconnected action puzzle rooms that can be solved creatively. It's a joy to uncover the different skills and use them to outsmart the cleaners. Similarly, I love the bleak universe that has been imagined. For that, Subaeria has been an enjoyable challenge. Number 1. Trailblazers. Trailblazers is a gripping racer that oozes jet set radio personality. The future funk soundtrack features upbeat, groovy tracks like Get On Up by Scope and Take It to the Hoop by the D-Revolutions. The first playable character's name is Jetstream, and even the confirm button sound is very Jet Set-like. You'll know it when you hear it. Aside from its aesthetic influence, this game is a hover racer in the vein of F-Zero or Wipeout, but with a Splatoon staple to mix things up. you can paint the track with your trail, affording you or your teammates the ability to boost on it later. This twist makes Trailblazers something I rarely see in video games, a team racer. There can only be one winner, but you have to work as a team, knowing that a rising tide will lift all boats. Of course, there are real-world analogs to this. The first one that came to mind for me was Tour de France. And much like creating a windbreak for your teammate, you don't get to benefit from your own trail immediately. So I quickly came to wonder how much of the nuances of real-life team racing can apply here. If teams are good enough, will they need to establish roles and potentially sacrifice their own placement for that of a teammate? How do you formulate optimal routes to avoid opposing trails, or better yet, should you do your best to paint over them? In this way, I would love to see a push for Trailblazers as an esports game. The game has been amazing for a novice like myself, but it seems like there may be a high skill ceiling for people willing to invest the time. Aside from how unconventional team races are in video games, Trailblazers is just a damn good racer. The sense of speed as you build up from 1x to 4x boost is exhilarating. The tracks are fantastic with varied environments including canyons, deserts, and lush forests. Additionally, the single player content is a lot of fun with a charming storyline and plenty of challenges to tackle. The only drawback is that it's hard to find an online multiplayer game even with cross-platform multiplayer enabled. Outside of that, Trailblazers is my favorite game of the week. That concludes another Indie Weekly. Once again, check out that Victorium giveaway video if you haven't. Hopefully this shortened format will allow me to get you other videos I've been wanting to make, so be sure to sub for more indie goodness. Otherwise, hit that like and drop a comment, and look for another Indie Weekly next week. Peace.